Hi again. I'm going to continue on with the book, but I was just wondering, were you able to finish up your homework? Do you have, and one of the homeworks was for session 7. They wanted you to find, to come up with a book that is very important to you. And it could be almost any reason why. It could be because it had a certain meaning. It could be that you just like it the best. And then they wanted you to come up with either a life lesson or a theme that was from this book. My book, I read this a long time ago, probably when I was in 5th or 6th grade. And it was actually one of my favorite books, and it still is today. Um, the reason why I liked it is this was actually the first book that I actually got lost in the book. You know how you can just you feel like you become part of the book, that you feel like it's happening to you. You cry when somebody dies, or you laugh when something funny goes on. Um, this was the first book that I really got lost in, and the book is called um, "The Outsiders" by S.E. Hinton. And what I did for my homework is I wrote down the book that matters the most to me is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. You know, she was 16 years old when she wrote this book, and it's actually been a bestseller when it came out, and it's still one of the books that gets read quite often. I know my son read it, and both my son and daughter read it. My son had the same feeling about the book as I did, where my daughter just thought it was okay book. Um, but it's one of those books that if you ever get a chance to read, I would definitely read it. Um, so what I did for my homework is I wrote, the book that matters to me is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. It was really the first book I truly got lost in. The life lesson I got from this book is you don't have to come from the same blood to be a family. There was, I don't remember the characters' names, but there was Ponyboy and Soda Pop, and their older brother lost their parents when they were young, and their older brother was raising them. And there was also another young friend that one of the main characters, I can't remember his name right now, um, in the book. And after a fight, after this kid accidentally killed another child, um, Ponyboy and this kid ran away, and they're hiding out in this church. Um, and they were always looking out for this younger kid. So, and he was more like a brother to them than anything else. And that's why it's more, it's not just blood, it's also, how you feel about other people. The other thing is that the other lesson that I learned is that you need to be true to yourself. And Ponyboy, at towards the end of the book, um, that one child that I don't remember his name is, was dying, and he told Ponyboy that he needs to be true to himself, and or to stay golden. And I took that as meaning to stay true to yourself. Ponyboy was a very good person, and was struggling with the riots back in the 50s, not the riots back in the 50s, but the fighting between the greasers and the jocks. Um, so that's what I took out of that book. And hopefully you can do the same. It doesn't have to be anything major. This is probably about 3 sentences. You know, if you get it done in less than that, just really remember to write down the name of the book, why it matters to you, and one life lesson or the theme of the book. It's not too hard. I know you can do it because you're a pretty smart kid. Um, let's get on. This is chapter 12. The mirror of freeze. Christmas was coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts woke up to itself covered in several feet of snow. The lake froze like solid, and the Weasley's twins were punished for bewitching several snowballs so that they followed Quibble around, bouncing off the back of his turban. A few owls had that managed to battle their way through the stormy skies that delivered mail had to nurse back to health by Hagrid before they flew off again. No one could wait for the holidays to start. While the Gryffindor's common room and the great hall were had roaring fires, the drafty corridors had become icy and a bitter wind rattling through the windows in the classrooms. Worst of all was Professor Snipe's classes down in the dungeons, where their breath rose in a mist before them, and they kept and and, and they kept as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. I do feel so sorry," said Drago Malfoy, one potions class, "for all those people who have to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas because they're not wanted at home." He was looking over at Harry as he spoke. Crab and Goyle chuckled. Harry had been measuring a potion spine of lionfish. Ignored them. Malfoy had even been more unpleasant than usual since the Quidditch match. Disgusted that the Slytherins had lost, he had tried to get everyone laughing at how a wide-mouthed tree frog would be replaced Harry as seeker next. Then he'd realized that nobody found this funny because they were all so impressed by the way Harry had managed to stay on his bucking broomstick. So Malfoy, jealous and angry, had gone back to taunting Harry about having no proper family. It was true that Harry wasn't going back to Prever Drive for Christmas. Professor McGonagall had come around the week before, making a list of students who would be staying for the holidays, and Harry had signed up at once. He didn't feel sorry for himself at all. This would probably be the best Christmas he had ever had. Ron and his brothers were staying too, because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were going to Romania to visit Charlie. When they left the dungeons at the end of potions, they found a large fir tree blocking the corridor ahead. Two enormous feet stuck out of the bottom, and a loud puffing sound told them that Hagrid was behind it. "Hey, Hagrid, want any help?" Ron asked, sticking his head through the branches. "Nah, I'm all right. Thanks, Ron. Would you mind moving out of the way?" Um, came Malfoy's cold drool from behind them. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasleys? Hoping to be a gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts, I suppose? That hut, that hut of Hogwarts must be like a palace compared to what your family's used to." Ron dived at Malfoy just as Snape came around the stairs. "Weasley!" Ron let go of the front of Malfoy's robes. He was provoking Professor Snipes. He was provoked, Professor Snipe," said Hagrid, sticking his huge hairy face from behind the tree. Malfoy was insulting his family. "Be that as it may, fighting is against Hogwarts rules." Hagrid said Snape sulkily. "5 points from Gryffindor, Weasley, and be grateful there wasn't more. Move along, all of you." Malfoy, Crab, and Goyle pushed roughly past the tree, um, stringing needles everywhere, and um, and smirking. "I'll get him," said Ron, grinding his teeth at Malfoy's back. "One of these days I'll get him." "I hate them both," said Harry, Malfoy, and Snape. "Come on, cheer up. It's nearly Christmas," said Hagrid. "Tell you what, come with me and see the Great Hall looks a treat." So the three of them followed Hagrid and his tree off to the great hall, where Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy with the Christmas decorations. Ah, Hagrid, the last tree. Put it in the far corner, would you? The hall looked spectacular. Festoons of holly and mistletoe hung all around the walls, and no less than 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the room, some sparkling with tiny icicles, some glittering with hundreds of candles. How many days you got left till your holidays? Hagrid asked. Just one, said Hermione. And that reminds me, Harry, Ron, we've got half an hour before lunch, and we should be in the library. Oh, yeah, you're right, said Ron, tearing his eyes away from Professor Flintwick, who had golden bubbles blooming out of his wand and was trailing them over the branches of the new tree. The library? Said Hagrid, following them out of the hall. Just before the holidays? Bit kind, aren't you? Oh, we're not working, Harry told him brightly. Ever since you mentioned Nicholas Flannel, we've been trying to figure out who he is. You what? Hagrid looked shocked. Listen here. I've told you, drop it. It's nothing to you what the dog's garden. We just want to know who Nicholas Flannel is. That's all," said Hermione. "Unless you'd like to tell us and save us the trouble," Harry asked. "We must have been through hundreds of books already, and we can't find him anywhere. Just give us a hint. I know read his name somewhere." "I'm saying nothing," said Hagrid flatly. "Just have to find out for ourselves then," said Ron, and they left Hagrid looking disgruntled and hurried off to the library. They had indeed been searching the books for Flannel's names ever since Hagrid had let it slip. Because how else were they going to figure out what Snape was trying to steal? The trouble was, it was very hard to know where to begin, not knowing that Flannel might have done to get himself into a book. He wasn't a great wizard of the 20th century or noble magical names of our time. He was missing too, and for important modern magical discoveries, a study of recent developments in wizardry, and then, of course, there was a sheer size of the library, tons of thousands of books, thousands of shelves, hundreds of narrow rows. Hermione took out a list of subjects and titles she had decided to search, while Ron strolled down a row of books and started pulling them off the shelves at random. Harry wandered over to the restricted section. He had been wondering for a while if flannel wasn't somehow in there. Unfortunately, you need a specific signed note for one of the teachers to look in any of these restricted books, and he knew he'd never get one. These were the books containing powerful dark magic, never taught at Hogwarts, and only read by the elder students studying advanced defense against the dark arts. What are you looking for, boy? Nothing, said Harry. Madame Prince, the librarian, Pince, the librarian, banished a feather duster at him. You'd better get out, then. Go on, out. Wishing he'd been a bit quicker at thinking up some story, Harry left the library. He, Ron, and Hermione were already agreed they better not ask Madame Pince where they could find flannel. They were sure she would be able to tell them, but they couldn't risk Snape hearing what they were up to. Harry waited outside the corridor to see if the other two found anything, but he wasn't very hopeful. They had been looking for 2 weeks after all, but as they only had odd moments between lessons, it wasn't surprising that they found nothing. What they really needed was a nice long search without Madame Pince beneath breathing down their necks. 5 minutes later, Ron and Hermione joined him, shaking their heads. They were off to lunch. You will keep looking while I'm away, won't you? Said Hermione, and send me an owl if you find something. And you could ask your parents if they know who Flannel is, said Ron. It'd be safe to ask them. Very safe. They're both dentists, said Hermione. Once the holidays had started, Ron and Harry were having too good of time to think much about flannel. They had the dormitory to themselves, and the common room was far emptier than usual, as they were able to get the good armchairs by the fire. They sat by they sat by the hour, eating anything that they could spare on toasting forks, bread, English muffins, marshmallows, and plotting ways to to get Malfoy expelled, which were fun to talk about even if they wouldn't work. Ron also started teaching Harry wizard chess. This was exactly like Muggle chess, except that the figures were alive, which made it a lot like directing troops into battle. Ron's set was very old and battered. Like everything else he owned, it had once belonged to someone else in his family. In this case, his grandfather, however, an old chessman, weren't weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them as well as he never had trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with the chessman. Um, Simas Finnegan had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing. Don't send me there. You can't see his knight. Send him. You can't afford to lose him. You can afford to lose him. On Christmas Eve, Harry had went to bed, looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke early in the morning, however, the first thing he saw was a small pile of packages at the foot of his bed. "Merry Christmas," said Ron sleepily as Harry scrambled out of bed and pulled on his bathrobe. "You too," said Harry. "What will you look at this? I've got some presents." "What did you expect? Turnips?" said Ron, turning to his own pile, which was a little bigger than Harry's. Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in thick brown paper, and scrawled across it was "To Harry from Hagrid." Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded like a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. "We received your message and enclosed your Christmas present from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." Taped to the note was a 50 pence piece. "That's friendly," said Harry. Ron was fascinated by the 50 pence. "Weird," he said. What a shape. This is money?" "You can keep it," said Harry, laughing at how pleased Ron was. "Hagrid and my aunt and uncle, who so who sent these?" "I think I know who that one's from," said Ron, turning a bit pink and pointing at the very lumpy parcel. "My mom. I told her you didn't expect any presents, and oh no," she groaned. She's made you a Weasley sweater. Harry had torn open the parcel to find a thick, hand knitted sweater in emerald green and a large box of handmade, homemade fudge. Every year she makes us a sweater, said Ron, unwrapping his own, and mine's almost maroon. And mine's always maroon. That's really nice of her, said Harry, trying the fudge, which was very tasty. His next present also contained candy, a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. This one, this only left one parcel. Harry picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery gray went slithering onto the floor, where it lay in a gleaming folds. Ron gasped. I've heard of these, he said in a harsh voice, dropping the box of every flavor beans he'd gotten from Hermione. If that's what I think it is, they're really rare. They're really valuable. What is it? Harry picked up the shining, slithering cloth off the floor. It was strange to touch, like water woven into material. It's an invisible cloak, said Ron, a look of awe on his face. I'm sure it is. Try it on. Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Ron gave a yell. It is! Look down! Harry looked down at his feet, but they were gone. He dashed to the mirror. Sure enough, his reflection looked back to him, just his head sprawled in midair, his body completely invisible. He pulled the cloak over his head, and his reflection vanished completely. There's a note, said Ron suddenly. A note fell out of it. Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing he had never seen before were the following words. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time that you were it is time that it was returned to you. A very Merry Christmas to you. There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Ron was admiring the cloak. I'd give anything, any one of these, he said. Anything. What's the matter? Nothing, said Harry. He felt very strange. Who had sent him the cloak? He had it really once belonged to his father. Before he could say or think anything else, the dormitory door flew open, and Fred and George Weasley bounced in. Harry stuffed the cloak quickly out of sight. He didn't feel like sharing it with anyone else yet. Merry Christmas! Hey, look! Harry's got a Weasley sweater, too. Fred and George were wearing blue sweaters, one with a large yellow F and the other one with a G. Harry's is better than ours, though, said Fred, holding up Harry's sweater. She obviously made more of an effort if you're not family. Why aren't you wearing yours, Ron? George demanded. Come on, get it on. They're lovely and warm. I hate maroon, Ron moaned half-heartedly as he pulled it over his head. You haven't got a letter on yours, George observed. I suppose she thinks you didn't forget your name, but we're not stupid. We know we're called George and Forge. What's all this noise? Percy Weasley stuck his head through the door, looking disapprovingly. He had clearly gotten halfway through unwrapping his presents as he too carried a lumpy sweater in his arm, which Fred seized. P for perfect. Get it on, Percy. Come on, we've all wearing ours. Even Harry's got one. I don't want, said Percy thickly as the twins forced the sweater over his head, knocking his glasses askew. And we're not sitting with the prefects today either, said George. Christmas is time for family. The frog marched the they they frog marched Percy from the room, his arms pinned to his side by his sweater. Harry had never in his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat roast turkeys, mountains of roast beef, of roast and broiled potatoes, platters of chipolus, tureens of butter, peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. Those uh, fantastic party favors were nothing like the fi- fibble mungles ones that the Darsleys usually bought. With their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats inside, Harry pulled a wizard cracker with Fred, and it didn't just bang. It went off like a blast, like a cannon that and engulfed them all in a cloud of blue smoke, while from the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat uh, and several live white mice. Up at the high table, Dumbledore had swapped his pointed wizard's hat for a flowered bonnet and was crackling merrily at a joke Professor Flintwick had just read. Flaming Christmas pudding followed the turkey. Percy nearly broke his tooth on a silver uh, sickle um, embedded in his slice. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine. Finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amusement, chuckled and blushed, her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non explodable luminous balloons, a grow your own wart kit, and his own new wizard chess set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were going to end up at Mrs. Uh, Norris's Christmas dinner. Harry and the Weasleys spent a happy afternoon having um, a furious snowball fight on the grounds. Then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire at the Gryffindor's common room, where Harry broke in his new chess set by losing spectacular to Ron. He supposed to he supposed he wouldn't have lost so badly if Percy hadn't tried to help him so much. After a meal of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, everyone felt too full and sleepy to do um, much before bed, except sit and watch Percy uh, chase Fred and George all over Gryffindor's tower because they'd stolen his prefect badge. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever, yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into bed was he free to think about the invisible cloak and whoever had sent it. Ron, full of turkey and cake, and with nothing mysterious to bother him, fell fast asleep, almost soon as he'd drawn the curtains of his four-poster bed. Harry leaned over the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak out from under it. His father's? This has been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, and, smoother than silk, light as air. Use it well, the note had said. He had to try it on now. He slipped out of the bed and wrapped the cloak around him. Looking down at his legs, he saw only um, moonlit and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement fled through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere, and Flitch would never know. Ron grunted in his sleep. Should Harry wake him? Something held him back, his father's cloak. He felt that this time, the first time, he wanted to use it alone. He crept out of the dormitory, down the stairs, across the common room, and climbed through the portrait hole. Who's there? Squawked the fat lady. Harry said nothing. He walked quietly down the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing, and thought, and then it came to him. The restricted section of the library. He'd be able to read as long as he liked, as long as it took to find out who Flannel was. He set off, drawing the invisible cloak right around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry lit a lamp in, to see his way along the rows of the books. The lamp looked as if it was floating along in midair, and even though Harry could feel his arm supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right at the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope that separated these books from the rest of the library, Harry held up his lamp and read the titles. They didn't tell him much. Their peeling faded gold letters spelled words in languages Harry didn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark stain on it, and it looked horribly like blood. The hours, the hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not. But he thought a faint whispering was coming from the books, and those he he knew else who shouldn't be, and they knew someone there who shouldn't be. He had to stir somehow. He had to start somehow, somewhere. Setting the lamp down carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelves for an interesting looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty because it was very heavy, and balancing it on his knee, it fell open. A piercing, blood curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry slapped it shut, but the squeak went on and on, one high, unbreakable, ear piercing note. He stumbled backwards and looked over and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming from the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back into the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Flinch in the doorway. Flinch's pale, wild eyes looked straight through him, and Harry slipped under Flinch's outstretched arm and streaked off up the corridor. The book shrieks still rang in his ear. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of arms. He had been so busy getting away from the library he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of arms near the kitchen, he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. You asked me to come directly to you, Professor, if anybody was wandering around at night, and somebody's been in the library. the library's restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain from his face. Whenever he was, Flinch must have known a shortcut, because his short, greasy face was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape. He was who replied. The restriction section. While they can't be far, we'll catch them. Harry stood rooted to the spot as Flinch and Snape came around the corner ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and if they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quickly as he could. The door still ajar to his left. It was his only hope. He squeezed through that, holding his breath, trying not to move, and to his relief, he managed to get inside the room without being noticed. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footprints disappear away. That had been close, very close. It was a few seconds before he had noticed anything about the room he had hidden in. It looked like an uh, unused classroom. The dark shapes of desks and chairs were piled against the walls, and there was an upturned wastepaper basket. But propped against the wall, facing him, was something that didn't look as if it belonged there, something that looked as if someone had just put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame, standing with two clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top: Eris Stara Empress Aut Ob Kefroy I E Wheel. He panicked, fading away, that there was no sound of Flinch and Snape. Harry moved nearer to the mirror, wanting to look at himself, but see no reflection again. He stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hands to his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He whirled around. His heart was pounding far more um, furiously than when the book had screamed, for what he had seen, not only himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror. There he was, reflected in it, white and scared, scared looking. And there, reflected behind him, was at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulders, but still no one else was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he, in fact, in a room full of invisible people, and this mirror's trick was that it reflected them, invisible or not? He looked at the mirror again. A woman standing right behind his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out a hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd touch her. Their reflections were so close together, but he felt only air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was very young, and she was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair, and her eyes were just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape. But then he noticed that she was crying, smiling but crying at the same time. The tall and black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses. His hair was very untidy. It stuck up in the back just like Harry's did. Harry was very close to the mirror now, that his own nose was nearly touching that of his reflection. "Mom," he whispered. "Dad?" They they just looked at him, smiling, and slowly Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other parts of of green eyes like his, others' noses like his, even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's um, knobby knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potter smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them, his hands pressed flat against the glass as though he was hoping to feel right through it and to reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from his mother's face and whispered, "I'll be back," and hurried from the room. "You could have woke me up," said Ron crossly. "You can come tonight. I'm going back. I want to show you the mirror." "I'd like to see your mom and dad," Ron said eagerly. "And I want to see all your family, all the Wesleys. You'll be able to show me brother and everyone, your other brother and everyone." "You can see them any time, any old time," said Ron. "Just come around my house this summer. Anyway, maybe it only shows dead people. Shame about not finding flannel, though. Have some bacon or something. Why aren't you eating anything?" Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents and were seeing them again tonight. He had almost forgotten about flannel and didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared what the three-headed dog was guarding? What did it matter if Snape stole it? Really? "Are you all right?" said Ron. "You look odd." What Harry feared most was that he might not be able to find the room again. With Ron covered in the cloak too, they had to walk much more slowly the next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passages for nearly an hour. "I'm freezing," said Ron. "Let's forget and go back." "No," Harry hissed. "I know it's here somewhere." They passed the ghost of a tall witch gliding in the opposite direction, but saw no one else. Just as Ron started moaning that his feet were dead with cold, Harry spotted the suit of arms. "It's here, just here." "Yes." They pushed past the door open. They pushed the door open. Harry dropped the cloak from around his shoulders and ran to the mirror. There they were. His father and mother beamed at the sight of him. "See," Harry whispered. "I can't see anything. Look at them all. There's loads of them. I can only see you. Look at it properly. Go on, stand where I am." Harry stepped aside, but with Ron in front of the mirror, he didn't see his family anymore. Just Ron in his paisley pajamas. Ron thought was staring transfixed at his image. "Look at me," he said. "Can you see all your family standing around you?" "No, I'm alone, but I'm different. I look older, and I'm head boy." "What?" I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to, and I'm holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. I'm uh, I'm Quidditch captain too." Ron tore his eyes away splendid eight from his splendid sight to look exactly at Harry. "Do you think this mirror shows the future? How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look." "You had it to yourself all last night. Give me a bit more time." "You're only holding the Quidditch cup. What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents." "Don't push me." A sudden noise outside the corridor um, put an end to their discussion. They haven't realized how loudly they've been talking. Quiet. Quick. Run through the cloak behind over them as the luminous eyes of Miss Norris came around the door. Ron and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same thing. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed like an ages, she turned and left. This isn't safe. She might have gone for Flitch. I bet she heard us. Come on. And Ron, and, and Ron pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted the next morning. Want to play chess, Harry? Said Ron. No. Why don't we go down and visit Hagrid? No, you go. I know what you're thinking about, Harry. That mirror. Don't go back tonight. Why not? I don't know. I've just got a bad feeling about it. And anyway, you had too many close shaves already. Flitch, Snape, and Mrs. Norris are wandering around. So what if they can't see you? What if they walk into you? What if they knock something? What if you knock something over? You sound like Hermione. I'm serious, Harry. Don't go. But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was to get back in front of the mirror, and Ron wasn't going to stop him. The third night he found his way quite more quickly than before. He was walking so fast he knew he was making more noise than was wise, but he didn't meet anyone. And there were his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Harry sank down to the floor, um, on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him from staying there all night with his family, nothing at all, except. So back again, Harry? Harry felt as though his insides had turned to ice. He looked behind him. Sitting at one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him. So desperate to get to the mirror, he hadn't noticed himself. I didn't see you, sir. Strange how nearsighted being invisible can make you, said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling. So, said Dumbledore, slipping off the desk to sit on the floor with Harry, you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the mirror of Isolde. I don't know if I didn't know it was called that, sir, but I expect you'll realize by now what it does. I will. It shows me my family, and it showed your friend Ron himself as head boy. How did you know? I don't need a cloak to become invisible, said Dumbledore gently. Now, can you think what the mirror of Easel shows us all? Harry shook his head. Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to use the mirror of Easel like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly as he is. Does that help? Harry thought. Then he said slowly, it shows us what we want, whatever we want. Yes and no, said Dumbledore quietly. It shows us nothing more and nothing less than the deepest, most desperate desire in our hearts. You, who have never known his family, see them standing around. Ronald Weasley, who has always been overshadowed by his brothers, sees himself standing alone, the best of them all. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge or truth. Men have wanted men wanted a way before it, entered by what they have seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if what it would shows is real or even possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry. And I ask you not go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared. It does not do it it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. Now, why don't you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed? Harry stood up. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something? Obviously, you've just done so. Dumbledore smiled. You may ask me one more thing, however. What do you see when you look into the mirror? I, I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Harry stared. One can never have enough socks, said Dumbledore. Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books. It was only when he was back in bed that struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then he had thought as he shoved Scrabers off his pillow, it had been quite a pleasant question. Wow, that was interesting. Um, what do you think you would see? Uh, I don't know. Me, I'm pretty happy. I have a lot of things. I have my children, I have my family. So I'm pretty happy in that aspect. Don't have a lot of money. That doesn't really interest me. I wonder if it would show me as being successful. I always wanted to be super successful. My sister and brothers are both very successful, and you know what I do. I'm a teacher aide. Um, I love my job, but I wonder if they will show me as being like top something. I don't know. Um, Kind of interesting though. All right. Talk to you later.